y'all, welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. So this is a book review. Actually, it's a review of two books. I have read these together, The Scarlet Letter, go that way, Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne and Hester by Laurie Lico Albanese. Interesting set of books. We'll be talking about those in just a minute. Okay, guys, so The Scarlet Letter was written, was published around 1850 by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And this is probably considered one of his most famous, probably is his most famous book. A lot of people know about The Scarlet Letter. A lot of people use the image of The Scarlet Letter without actually ever having read the book, which is a real shame. This is probably one of my favorite books. Hawthorne is one of those, you either love him or you hate it. He tends to write long sentences, and he's got little asides in the sentence. So you'll be reading along the sentence and there'll be a dash and another clause and then another dash, and he kind of resumes the sentence he started with. Which can be a little bit distracting, but some of his prose can be so very beautiful, and the way he paints the symbolism is just lovely. Reading it as through my 20th, 21st century lens, I find this story very proto-feminist. There's a lot of supportive subtext to women's issues in this novel. So it was interesting to read, going, wow, that was before its time. So a lot of different themes in this book. It's about sin and redemption, isolation, rejection, and embracing rejection to some extent. There's man versus society and man versus self as part of the larger ideas within the Scarlet Letter. It does open with this really bizarre section that could probably be just chucked out completely and not change the book whatsoever. There's a first chapter called The Custom House, that it's basically this 30-40 pages about Nathaniel Hawthorne's personal experience as a collector or surveyor or working in a customs agency house in Salem. I couldn't figure out what it had to do with anything. It was well written, and there were a couple of places that so a couple of quotes that I thought were quite interesting. One of them was, "Human nature will not flourish any more than a potato if it be planted and replanted for too long a series of generations in the same worn-out soil." He was explaining why he moved away from home. Like, I can go with that. I can take that. All right, so I have a few quotes that I wanted to share. So if you're unfamiliar with this story, okay, if you're not interested in a spoiler, sorry, there's going to be spoilers, because there's no way to really talk about the Scarlet Letter and Hester without some sort of spoiler. Just not possible. So with the Scarlet Letter, the story itself opens with a scene with a chapter called The Prison Door. And he gives you this image of this prison in supposedly Boston, Massachusetts Bay Colony. Takes place in colonial America in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And you get this great imagery of this dark prison door and this rose bush that's growing wild by the edge of this gray, oppressive building with these kind of gray, oppressive people crowded around outside this prison door waiting for whatever's going to happen to happen. And so I'm going to read a quote from that chapter where he's talking about, you get all this stuff about the building itself, and then the last paragraph you get this imagery of this rose bush right next to it. It says, "This rose by strange chance has been kept alive in history, but whether it had merely survived out of the stern old wilderness so long after the fall of the gigantic pines and oaks that originally overshadowed it, or whether, as there is fair authority for believing, it had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson as she entered the prison door, we shall not take upon us to determine." I thought that was an interesting comment. Anne Hutchinson was actually a real character, a real person, a real woman in the Massachusetts Bay Colony who was arrested and tried for heresy and banished from the colony because she believed that she had as much right as anyone else to interpret scripture, and that God could speak to anyone. He did not just have to talk to pastors, that people who could read the scriptures for themselves could have revelation from the divine. And so I thought that was an interesting, it was interesting for him to use Anne Hutchinson in this kind of context. So as the story goes along, we've got this image of the prison door, and out of the prison door comes this very beautiful young woman, Hester Prynne, who has committed adultery, which is what the big red A is for. And she has mercifully not been sentenced to death, but she has been sentenced for the rest of her natural life to have to wear this letter on her person at all times until the remainder of her natural life. And of course she embroidered it, and it's very kind of gaudy and gold and red, and it is her badge of shame. And she is kind of cast out to the edge of town, kind of a pariah, and she has conceived a child in adultery. And her little girl's name is Pearl, and she is raising Pearl on the outskirts of town. It's very interesting to see the religious life of the town portrayed next to how they've treated Hester. It's very interesting to say that the people that had the least mercy in the town were the other women, the older women in the town. I thought that was interesting. A lot of different things kind of going on, but it turns out that her baby's father is actually the young minister, and he is just dying of guilt and shame and cowardice because he let her take all the blame, and she refused to say who Pearl's father was, because she said it wasn't her business, that he would, if he wanted to say, he could say. So there is a lot of kind of guilt, and what is guilt, what is courage kind of wrapped up in here. And then you watch this relationship between Hester and her little girl. And Hester is constantly, the rest of the town kind of shuns Pearl as well, because she is just a handful, and you get comments from other people in the town about she's got witchcraft in her, she's just a little devil, she's an imp. And she is a handful. She's got a mouth. But I think it really made me go back and think about raising my own daughter, because my own daughter was and is a rather energetic, rather intelligent, spirited, opinionated, charming, wonderful young woman. It took me back to some of the times when she was little, and I would just kind of put my head in my hands and go, Lord, have mercy on all of us. Because she was just delightful, but you never quite knew what she was going to say. So in the middle of Pearl's development, and at one point Hester is thinking about how her own sin may have affected her child. You get this quote. So I'm just going to read this little section. In the little chaos of Pearl's character, there might be seen emerging, and could have been from the very first, the steadfast principles of an unflinching courage, an uncontrollable will, a sturdy pride which may be disciplined into self-respect, a bitter scorn of many things, which, when examined, might have been found to have the taint of falsehood in them. She possessed affections, too, hitherto acrid and disagreeable as are the richest flavors of unripe fruit. With all these sterling attributes, thought Hester, the evil which she inherited from her mother must be great indeed, if a noble woman does not grow out of the selfish child. So I thought about that and how my daughter, she was a very strong-willed child, but she has really always been and has continued to be, my warrior princess, interested in justice and fairness and equity. And I think every mother wonders what she has done wrong and what she has brought on her child's character. But it's just as Hester was able to see this beautiful woman that Pearl would grow up to be in this strong-willed child that she had. I think a lot of us who have raised daughters or sons have had some of these kind of experiences. So I really thought that was one of those important things to me. There's one scene where the minister is he is physically suffering from his guilt, and he goes to live in a place with a physician who actually turns out to be Hester's husband that they thought was lost at sea or captured by Indians, and he's actually trying to figure out who's Hester's baby's daddy is. But at one point, the minister falls asleep reading a book, and what is said is it must have been a work of quite ability in the somniferous school of literature, and that made me laugh. I had to write that one down. So very interesting story. The story ends with the minister coming clean in front of the community and immediately dying, which still leaves Hester and Pearl kind of in the lurch. Her ex-husband, now that his need for the target of his revenge is dead, he withers away and dies. Hester and Pearl take off for Europe, and many, many years later, Hester returns, takes up her little cottage by the sea, and of her own free will takes the letter back and wears the letter and lives out the rest of her days in Salem, or in Boston. And at the end of it is buried next to the Pearl's father. At the very end, they are buried together with a single tombstone with just the heraldic description of the Scarlet Letter, which just said, "On a field sable, the letter A, Jules, which was red for in heraldry. So that was the Scarlet Letter. Tried to not to have too many spoilers in there, but read the story. I highly recommend it. Most of all of Hawthorne's novels, except the Scarlet Letter, we know the real life experience that was the basis of that story. The Scarlet Letter is the only one that doesn't come, theoretically, from Hawthorne's personal experiences. So, the book Hester is a historical fiction reimagining of what that might have been, what that experience might have been. In this book, there is a young Nathaniel Hawthorne who meets a woman whose husband brings her to the colony, actually to the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the mid 1800s. He has a drug problem. He has an opium problem, and he has been released from the poorhouse and basically is going to Massachusetts to get a new start. He decides to leave her, take the few coins that her dad has given her, and go back to sea to make money as a ship's doctor. But leaves her basically penniless in a new place with no friends, no job, no nothing. She makes a way for herself by using her skills that she has as an embroideress, a seamstress, makes a whole life for herself over the next year, falls in love with Nathaniel Hawthorne, becomes pregnant with his child, and at which point her husband, the junkie, comes back. There's a long story about that. No spoilers on this one. You need to read this book. I really enjoyed this book. It was a quick read, but I really enjoyed it. It was very interesting, and very interesting how the Scarlet A, that plays in this story. Where does that Scarlet A come from? Very interesting, very nice reimagining of where this story started. All right, guys, so that is my review blatherings about the Scarlet Letter and Hester. I think these are a nice go together kind of thing. All right, if you're interested in hearing more stories, hit subscribe, hit notify. I don't know how often. I know I'll be doing these at least once a month, maybe more. It just kind of depends on how many books I'm reading, what's going on with my grading papers and my real world job. But yeah, let me know if there's a book that you would like for me to read and talk about. I would love to know what you guys are interested in me reading. All right, guys, I'll talk to you later. Bye.